The existential struggle of these times. Bruce Charlton. Over the past year, the conflict between the West and the Fire Nation, and, increasingly, its increasingly close major allies, has become more and more obviously existential in nature. The Fire Nation regards itself, I believe correctly, as being actively threatened with existential annihilation, and, unlike Western nations, the Fire Nation seems, increasingly, solidly, determined to fight to the last to defend its distinctive identity, including its Orthodox Christian Church. The West, which means, effectively the globalist multinational/no nations Western leadership class, also regards itself as in an existential struggle with the rapidly emerging Eastern Alliance, which is waxing in power both in absolute terms and relatively to the West, which, by contrast, is diminishing in both respects, including by deliberate self-destruction. So, it seems that the Western leadership class, which is all that matters in the West, since the Western masses are puppets to ideology, also regards the struggle with the Fire Nation as existential, as a must-win scenario. And, it should be obvious, must-win implies that no holds are barred with respect to the nature of weapons deployed in the struggle. For the globalist establishment, it has become a case of us or them with regard to the Fire Nation. Whether or not this is true, it is what they believe. But whereas the people of the Fire Nation are indeed a people, and know explicitly and in their hearts that they are engaged in an existential struggle for their identity and way of life, including Orthodox Christianity, by contrast, the Western masses, including Western Church Christians, are almost wholly ignorant, and in denial, of this fact. The Western masses misunderstand the situation completely, indeed in an inverted fashion. We have, overwhelmingly, adopted such a narrow, selfish, short-termist, self-blinded complacency, that existential matters are not even on the radar. And existential talk is regarded as sheerly crazy, paranoid, weird, dangerous, conspiracy theory stuff, to be avoided by all decent and sensible people. The Western masses would rather be destroyed utterly, than recognize the fact that they are deliberately being destroyed. Thus, in the West and among the masses, this astonishingly profound, cataclysmic, year of global change has, pretty much, passed them by. The world may be engaged in this titanic existential struggle, but the mental life, attitude and aspirations, of the Western masses has utterly failed to register this reality, instead vehemently rejecting all thought of this reality. The question remains as to the nature of this existential struggle. The most evil side is obvious. The Empire of Lies is the most evil grouping known in the history of the world, as being the only major civilization that has explicitly and officially adopted value inversion, and is expanding its scope, and coercively implementing inversion. But the other side, as it is emerging, although clearly less evil, in terms of their degree of evil, are a mixed bunch in terms of their motivations. Only overarching and Christian motivations count as positively good. And insofar as these exist at all, which is only in the Fire Nation, they do not seem likely to permeate the West, whatever happens. From our perspective in the West, the existential choice may between further solidification and extension of the totalitarian system by means of globalist institutions such as the UN/WHO, EU, NATO, financial groupings etc. along the lines of UN Agenda 2030 or the Great Reset. Or else World War III, which has already been extended to include multiple deliberate provocations on Fire Nation territory and active participation of personnel from adjacent and remote NATO states, and may, at any moment, explode into an explicit and expansile multinational, multi-regional, conflict. We the Western masses will not make, any choice between these material fates, since we are, voluntarily, yet denied, mentally colonized, almost wholly manipulated and dictated to. But the only effective Western deciders, the Western leadership class, are currently choosing between their perceived existential options, control, or war. So far the totalitarians have, apparently, regarded war as a threat to control. War has been, is being, prepared and prosecuted mainly by the destroyers, the makers and promoters of chaos. But if the totalitarian Western system leadership come to believe that war offers their best opportunity for increasing control, then war will happen very quickly, and the existential conflict of these times will suddenly be obvious to everybody. I did no more than follow the lead of chance, a helpful perspective on what to do when the adverse odds seem impossible to overcome. Bruce Charlton. I promised to help Torin, if I could. I was as eager as he was to see the end of Smaug, but Torin was all for plans of battle and war, as if he were really King Torin II, and I could see no hope in that. So I left him and went off to the Shire, and picked up the threads of news. It was a strange business. I did no more than follow the lead of chance, and made many mistakes on the way. Gandalf speaking, from The Quest of Erebor, in Unfinished Tales by J.R.R. Tolkien. I have previously written on how things, providentially, happened on this journey of the Hobbit. That the probabilities stacked against us in life can sometimes feel overwhelmingly bad, insofar as we can calculate them honestly. What is perhaps needed is a change of perspective, from which may come a desirable change in attitude, and then, from this perspective, valid grounds for hope. Some idea of what to do would also be helpful. In such a mood it may be useful to recall, again, we already know it, that God is good, our loving Father, and God is the Creator, and creation is ongoing. This means that there is such a thing as divine providence, and this applies to each of us, as individuals. We would be right, therefore, to have confidence in God from here onward, and starting from now. What to do, is that we, merely, need to start noticing whatever providence brings into our lives, take them seriously, make the right choices, learn from them, and then we will be on a right path. The apparently impossible has sometimes happened, but seldom in ways or by means that people expect or could possibly have predicted, and good outcomes are seldom what we would have asked for in advance, even when they are certainly good. The best possible results come from, seriously, minding our own business. If what we are then doing is in harmony with divine will, then great good may come of it. And, knowing this is true, may well prove to be a cure for being overwhelmed. This does not mean that we ought to cling to unrealistic optimism, simply because we cannot face it. Yet the fact is that we cannot know what will come, because we do not know the full situation, nor all its important causes. Faith in providence suggests that the best possible outcomes will, by whatever means, derive from making the right decisions, and the right decisions are those made in the spirit of transcendental hope. Talent. William Wildblood. So often I hear someone comment approvingly about someone else. He, or she, has a lot of talent. Speaking as someone who has no discernible talents, I might be accused of envy in what I have to say next, but hear me out. I certainly wish I could draw or paint or compose music or had any one of several gifts, but I do not think that having a talent is necessarily a good thing. After all, having a talent just means having an ability to do something skillfully, but surely what really matters is what you do, not how well you do it. When I look around at what people of talent are doing in the world today, I see mostly a trail of spiritual destruction. So few talented people are spiritually creative. Most are actively destructive of higher thought, deeper feeling, elevated sensibility. Here's an exchange pertinent to this subject between a spiritual master and a young artist, as recounted in the book Towards the Mysteries. Master, people talk of art, of literature, of becoming productive. What do they know about these things? There is the dissatisfaction of discontent in the human, because humanity is not creatively constructive but creatively destructive. Creative power is used for destructive purposes. Nearly all modern arts are blasphemy. Artist, but they are experience. Master, yes, mere experience. But experience is not vitally fruitful unless the absorbing element comes out of it. What does he mean by the absorbing element? I would say it's the ability to relate the experience to a higher spiritual value and see it in the light of that reality. Any experience taken on its own terms is regarded as not vitally, i.e. spiritually, fruitful. It may even be spiritually poisonous. Similarly, talent, on the face of it a good thing, can be, and often is today, spiritually destructive. If it is not put to the service of higher understanding, it is very likely to advance the ends of that which opposes higher understanding. Look at the world around you and tell me I am wrong. The almost opposite effects of oneness negative meditation, past versus present, implications for a truly valuable and transformative modern meditation. Bruce Charlton. In the pre-modern past, meditation was a matter of getting past the surface illusions of the mundane world, and reconnecting with the reality beneath. In other words, ancient meditation enabled man to pierce illusion and discover the world, as it truly was. Past meditation was therefore a negative method, a matter of removing, of discarding, yet it had positive results, because reality was already there, behind the illusions, waiting to be discovered. This was possible, because pre-modern man retained a connection with spiritual reality, and it was this underlying spiritual reality that provided the consensus view of mankind. It was indeed a common sense because it was common to all men, and meditation was able to discover this unifying commonality below the variable surface of personality and custom. Remove the illusions of the merely personal and local, and the eternal verities remained. But modern man is cut off from the spiritual, is alienated from the common world. Having become a detached individual, modern man has lost the spontaneous and unconscious group cohesion, a product of immersion in the spiritual and divine, which remained, until recent generations, as a dwindling residue of man's earliest consciousness. Nowadays, when meditation strips away or dissolves the surface illusions of the world, nothing remains. When illusions are cast aside, there is nothing left. When a negative method of meditation is deployed, the outcome is itself negative, because there is no consensus reality waiting to be discovered, but instead a void. By meditation, modern man does not gain the world, but loses it. While pre-modern meditation, in the right context, led to a strength and encouragement rooted in solid reality, modern meditation leads to nihilism and despair. If, that is, modern meditation is pursued rigorously and honestly. But it is not. Since modern meditation leads to no values, not motivations, and loss of the world, then, meditation is almost never pursued to its logical conclusion. Instead, modern meditators use meditation as, merely, a therapy, directed at making their meditator feel better. And as such, modern meditation is embedded in the standard, mainstream, totalitarian leftist assumptions of the modern world. Hence, modern meditators' attitudes are worldly, contemporary, and labile in accordance with tracking the changing and rootless dictates of the global establishment. Consider, if modern meditators were genuinely committed to the idea that everything was one, the world was illusion and the self/ego and thinking were the cause of illusion, they would realize that this illusory nature extended to all of morality. They would reject all notions of human rights and equality, because these are part of this world's illusion. They would realize that kindness was as illusory as aggression, that suffering was as illusory as the political views of their enemies. But this does not happen. Meditators claim that oneness meditation has all sorts of this worldly benefits. Some claim that an increase in meditation, or many meditators working together, will improve our lives in this world. Or that meditating makes for better people, kinder, more appreciative, more altruistic people. Because this is incoherent nonsense. In practice, modern meditation that aims at seeing through the illusion of this world is itself worldly, hence just a therapy, at best. It does not have the potential for transformative religious or spiritual power. I agree with the view that some kind of meditation is valuable, and for some people necessary, in this modern world, but its aims need to be quite different from the merely negative goals of seeing through illusion, almost the opposite. Modern meditation needs to be, not about discovering a reality already there, but instead about co-creating a reality that we choose and is in harmony with divine creation. We, as selves, need to start working with God in choosing to make the reality, which will not happen unless we take an active and conscious role. And that should be the nature, method, goal of meditation in 2023. Note, these ideas were stimulated by passages from an audio lecture by Stanley Messenger on the Wessex Research Group web pages. His ideas were mostly drawn from Rudolf Steiner. Love has been inverted, but Christians cannot abandon love. Francis Berger. The inversion of love is one of the most devastating weapons wielded by forces opposed to God and creation. Hardly a secret. At the same time, barely anyone in the modern world appears immune to evil's uncanny ability to turn the true meaning of love inside out. Christians, the vast majority of whom subscribe to some syrupy and perverted principle or the moral practice of altruism, are no exception here. Ask the average Christian to define love and you will find the definition differs only slightly from mainstream leftist interpretations, presuming it differs at all. Categorizing the abject failure to comprehend and practice true love under the spiritual catastrophe column seems insufficient. Apocalyptic is a more fitting way to describe it. Of course, not all are blind to the demonic inversions of love and the disastrous consequences the inversions inflict. Fittingly enough, many are revolted by the inversions. Unfortunately, this revulsion tends to bleed into love itself. Utterly repulsed by the anti-love the forces opposed to God and creation promulgate as love, those who discern the inversion often fall into the trap of abandoning love altogether. The impetus to turn one's back on love most likely stems from an erroneous conception of love as a weak, frail, enervated force susceptible to constant and continuous manipulation and degradation. From this perspective, love is a weakness rather than a strength, a force that diminishes and disempowers rather than a force that fortifies and empowers. From this point of view, love only renders individuals vulnerable, pliable, impressionable, compliant, and yielding. After all, tough times call for tough men with tough demeanors, not sickly sweet, saccharine cornballs waxing on about love. Especially not when the demonic establishment waxes on about loving mankind via diversity, inclusivity, equality, and keeping everyone safe. Whenever I write about love on this blog, I inevitably attract the attention of tough guys who are quick to equate my insistence on the fundamental necessity of love with the establishment's inversions of love. As far as the tough guys are concerned, love is the last thing the world needs, particularly when modern notions of love include the destruction of one's people and homeland, the active encouragement and advancement of sexual perversions, the willing embracing of totalitarianism, etc. Tough guys, listen, I know where you are coming from, and I tip my hat to your uncanny ability to see through the lies of modern inverted love. I'm with you as far as turning your backs on inverted love goes, but I part ways with you when you advocate for the abandonment of love altogether, particularly when you claim to be a Christian. Like it or not, love is the fundamental nature of reality, the metaphysical foundation of creation. Moreover, you cannot actively oppose love if you profess to be a follower of Christ. Learning about love and learning to love are the primary purposes of our mortal lives in this world. Figuring out that inverted love is not love is barely 1/10 of the battle. Turning your back on love entirely because of inverted love means you've lost the battle. So turn your tough-minded self back around and start learning about what love means and what it really is, and when you're ready, begin loving. Consider it your duty. Turning your back on love or refusing to love does little more than play into the enemy's hands. After all, the enemy desires nothing more than a world of death peopled by the unloved and the unloving. Why do you think the enemy worked so hard to invert love in the first place? Tough guy. Note added, love was central to Jesus' mission, and as far as I'm concerned, Jesus was the toughest guy the world has ever known. Something to think about. Direct thinking, spiritual contact and provenance. Bruce Charlton. It is a plague of all those who attempt or achieve some kind of spiritual contact to know what is the provenance of those beings that they contact. Are they who they claim, or are they someone or something else? I regard it as an advantage of what I have termed primary thinking or direct knowing, that, because it is direct, a sharing of thoughts between beings, it brings with it a knowledge of provenance, of who is being contacted. In other words, when communication is mind to mind, we know who or what we are dealing with, whereas when communication is mediated by sensory factors, words, whether spoken or written, or visions or any kind of symbolism, then this introduces an indirect layer between the minds, which may serve to conceal provenance. So direct knowing is intrinsically more reliable and valid. On the other hand, indirect communications are tempting, because they are often more precise, and occur, or can be induced, in higher volume and on demand. In other words, direct knowing tends to have a low amount of simple information, but, I would say, can be relied upon more solidly. Yet even direct thinking is not wholly reliable, because while a being may be known for who it is, nonetheless a being can conceal its intent. The motivation behind the thinking is part of the real self, the ultimate and irreducible basis of our individual being, hence inaccessible to any other being, inaccessible even to God. This ultimate privacy is the reason why beings have agency or free will. My point here is that we would be wise to be satisfied with the lower quantity and precision of direct thinking, and therefore not to crave, or insist upon, detailed and specific information on whatever we suppose we want, or think we need, to know. Psychedelics and Religion. William Wildblood. I am sympathetic to the people who advocate taking psychedelic drugs to enhance consciousness and to explore inner realms. They would say this is especially beneficial in an atheistic society such as ours, for it frees us from the iron grip of materialism and shines light into the dark clouds that obscure modern mind. We are given the direct experience of something beyond standard physical plane consciousness, and we can know for ourselves that we are not body but mind, and that mind has multi-dimensional aspects. As a teenager I took LSD a few times, so I know the transformative effect psychedelics can have, especially if you take them in a reverential frame of mind rather than for kicks, humbling yourself before the majesty of the universe. However, sympathy does not mean approval. I believe that the use of drugs, which is very ancient, came about when early human beings began to lose natural contact with the spiritual realms as the material world closed about them. This was in line with the evolution of consciousness, which requires the development of a solid center, the self, and a rational thinking mind that can become a co-creator with God rather than a passive participant in the general spiritual flow of life. A lot of people try to get back to this flow, but that is like a reversion to childhood, and it is spiritually immature. We must go forward into a new and higher awareness, one in which we do not merge into the all but become full spiritual individuals, mature, responsible, creative. Sometimes people need a cold shower rather than a warm bath in order to wake them up. Drugs were and are an escape. Early man resorted to them to try to recapture what he had lost, but his spiritual progress demanded that he move on and did not revert to what he had known in the past. Drugs are not recommended and never have been recommended by any proper spiritual teacher. The reason is they are attempts to break the barrier God has placed between this world and the next by artificial means. This barrier can be broken, but it should be broken by natural spiritual development if the encounter with the next world is to be authentic and psychically healthy. Drug takers may encounter non-material beings in their experiences, and these beings may seem to offer guidance and advice, but there are many denizens of the inner realms, and you will not encounter true higher beings if you seek to take heaven by force. Your experience will be limited, and you may well only experience the world of the demons, albeit often dressed up to resemble what seems a deep and exciting mystery to the unwary. We are not here not to experience the glories of the spiritual world, but to learn the lessons of the material one, though with the understanding that the spiritual is primary. It is possible that in this benighted and ignorant age drugs can help guide one towards a previously dismissed and rejected higher reality, but anything other than brief use will take you off the true spiritual path, which is not about experience but the sanctification of the soul. Since the fall we have been cut off from paradise. To attempt to recapture the paradisiacal state by artificial means, whether that be a drug or technique, special breathing, prolonged fasting or even excessive meditation, is an irreligious act that seeks to put you above God. The experience gained will be tainted and a counterfeit one to true mystical experience, because it will be lacking the humility and purity of motive which alone guarantee truth and ascent to higher realms. It will lead the individual away from God as he really is and towards one of the many imitations that exist both in this world and the next. The fact that so many people who advocate psychedelics report encounter with pagan deities or similar supernatural beings confirms this. These, if not demons, and they may well be, are leftovers from previous cycles of evolution. They continue to exist in the inner worlds but not on proper spiritual levels. Consciousness is a spiritual thing, but it is squeezed into a physical body to learn lessons which can eventually take it beyond the physical and beyond the spiritual as normally considered to the divine. In a physical body, consciousness becomes severely restricted but can also be focused and express greater powers of self-will and motivation than when not so restricted. To seek to escape this through drugs is to seek change from without, but change to be real must come from within. You reach the divine by becoming inwardly divine yourself, not from attempting to steal what is not yours. A truly spiritual consciousness is not the result of what you experience or even what you feel or what you know. It comes from what you are, and that to be of the right stuff demands humility, love of God and openness to the Spirit of Christ. This post follows on from the one about ancient civilizations, in that Graham Hancock, the most prominent mainstream proponent of that idea, is also an enthusiast for psychedelic exploration of consciousness. I just want to say you can be right about one aspect of the esoteric/mystical but completely wrong about other aspects. This is actually quite common and simply shows the importance of real spiritual discrimination and correct understanding of what the spiritual truly is. It is not higher consciousness. The devil has higher consciousness after a fashion. It is orientation of the heart to goodness, beauty and truth in their higher aspects, and a humble dedication to bring one's own soul into line with that, regardless of what this may cost in terms of personal sacrifice and renunciation. A tall order perhaps, but that is what it is, and we are all called to that path. There are no shortcuts. What will be the 2023 early year offensive against Western civilization, and against whom will it be directed? Bruce Charlton. In 2020 we had the Birdemic offensive against Western civilization, especially Christianity, amplified in 2021 by the Peck offensive, and in 2022 the Fire Nation affair. These were primarily directed against the Western masses, and were all supported solidly and aggressively by the entirety of the Western establishment, government, the leadership of major institutions, and the mass social media. This year I presume there will be another offensive, and my best guess is that it will be an amplification of the Fire Nation affair, an amplification that is intended to draw in, officially and fully, not just unofficially, partially, and in disguise, the forces of the West. But history is linear, and never repeats, and evil triumphant feeds upon itself. If early summer of 2020 represented the high point of the totalitarian, bureaucratic harmonic evil of planning, surveillance and control, since then, there has since been a waxing of spiteful, short-termist, destructive and chaos-inducing sorothic evil. So my prediction is that the 2023 offensive will be focused, not against the masses, but against the globalist establishment. There have already been many astonishing and horrible provocations against the Fire Nation by the sorothic powers, but these have so far failed to evoke any escalation from that side. Therefore, I think that the 2023 provocations will be directed against the West. In other words, I am suggesting that sorothic powers within the West, such as extreme hawks, covert wreckers, or rogue elements within the establishment, will be attempting provocations that are designed irresistibly to trigger rapid and wholesale escalation from the Western establishment. This kind of escalation is against the interests of the globalist establishment, who have so far prevented the rapid and multinational escalation of the Fire Nation affair, despite considerable pressure from the mass media and a minority of internal elements and their puppet heroes. To overcome this evident reluctance, there would need to be staged, but deniably, presumably via a chain of proxies, some kind of unconcealable, major, and intended to be, irresistible atrocity, against one or more of the key Western allies, which atrocity would be blamed upon the Fire Nation. All kinds of horrible and obvious possibilities spring to mind, so I will not attempt to guess which is most likely. The point is that the provocation should be experienced as so extreme and terrible as to be impossible to ignore, and demanding of a quick and extreme, and unwise, response. The intent, therefore, would be to stampede the establishment into acting against their own interests, in such a way as further and irreversibly to initiate the collapse of their monolithic global structure of control, subversion and inversion, of thinking and feeling. Instead, to cry havoc, and let slip the dogs of war. Accelerating chaos. It's all just a guess, but if it does happen, then don't be fooled. We can't stop it, that is not our job. Our job is spiritual, and consists in knowing evil, cutting through its deceptions, pointing out its operations, to declare, I see you. How does blanket mind control work? Bruce Charlton. That there is blanket mind control is obvious to the minority who are not a part of it. How it works, and how it is both comprehensive and increasingly detailed, is a worthy subject for theorizing. On the one hand, there have been great efforts to present a unified, monolithic body of virtual reality. This is accomplished initially by central and mandatory scripting of the major media/official narratives. Secondly, especially since the Birdemic coup of early 2020, there is the suppression of specific dissenting views from mainstream mass and social media. Since the Fire Nation affair of 2022 there has been added the general exclusion of whole categories, other major sources that differ from the Western monolith, such as Fire Nation sources. And, because neither control nor exclusion can be complete, and both can be overcome by those who make some effort, there is also an extra layer of deterrent from the demonization of those who make the effort to overcome these restrictions. Those who access alternative, or prohibited foreign, mass and social media are now regarded as a species of proto-terrorist. Readings, or otherwise accessing, information/theories/opinions out with the official media monolith is now regarded as de facto evidence of dangerous, probably criminal, activity, or being an agent of enemy powers. Or, if not evil, then such behavior is regarded as insane or mentally defective. Thus, although it is not difficult to discover the truth behind the propaganda, doing so, or even by simply attempting to do so, is quasi-criminal activity, and expressing such views is actually criminal. And even when not legally criminal, such behavior may be sanctioned with extreme, and unbounded, severity by the system through multiple other mechanisms: loss of employment, education, income, by setting virtual/actual mobs on institutions or people, etc. This situation is what the modern consciousness confronts, looking out onto the world. There is a single master choice that the choosing agent makes: either one is an in-grouper, a system believer, which happens by default, or else one actively steps into an out-group, which act, in itself, is sufficient evidence for a wide range of exclusions and persecutions. Not to be mind-controlled is therefore a decision to become a social pariah and paint a target on one's own back. Such a step is a particularly strong deterrent for women in general, who are highly motivated to be accepted in a peer group, as big as possible. For men, such a step is often ruled out, both for those who aspire to ascend the social hierarchy, by successfully competing in socially valued hierarchies, by leading alliances, and also for the larger proportion of insecure men who feel the necessity to appease the social hierarchy. Regarded thus, it is hardly surprising that the majority are mind-controlled. Why not be mind-controlled, when all the social benefits accrue to those who are controlled? Well, there probably needs to be a strong inner motivation. And this motivation needs to be personal, individual, not groupish, since all Western groups of significant size, power or prestige are converged parts of the system. What are the possible causes of a strong inner motivation? There are fewer and fewer of these inner motivators that are out with the system and also sufficiently effective. Furthermore, suitable potential strong inner motivators increasingly need to become explicit, or otherwise they will passively be eroded by mounting adverse pressures to conform and converge. And on top of all this, the inner motivators need to be explicitly chosen, including by being rooted in metaphysical intuitions different from those of the system. Otherwise, alternative ways of living will surely be wedged and expanded and subverted piecemeal, as happens when failing one, then more, of the litmus tests. At bottom, it is, as usual, about ultimate motivation, and the decision of whether we want to be mind-controlled by a monolithic totalitarian system, which itself depends substantially upon who we believe is ultimately doing the controlling. And then upon whether we believe that we ought to be controlled at all, or ought, instead, to be self-controlled, as free and responsible agents. Note, the above was stimulated by a topic thread by Bill Ryan, at Project Avalon. The tradition the Prince of Lies does not know. Francis Berger. If there's a glaring fault in tradition, it's in the belief that tradition is a finished product. More precisely, that everything that needed to be learned and said has been learned and said. Nothing new needs to be added. All the individual has to do is learn the tradition and obey it. This external attitude toward tradition, especially in Christianity, lies in the conceptualization of truth as an eternal criterion, truth as a mooring anchor, fixed and static, immovable as it holds everything in place. The problem with this approach to tradition is it enforces an artificial stasis onto God and creation, which are inherently dynamic. In this sense, Christians have chosen fixation over creativity. Choosing a condition without positive movement or change leads to a variety of difficulties. To begin with, a tradition that has stopped moving forward can be easily studied and dissected. Inertia and inactivity on the part of traditionalists invites activity and energy from those who seek to destroy tradition. A fixed, immobile, stubborn tradition is easy prey for opportunistic predators who have all the time in the world to analyze its victim, discover its weak points, and gnaw away at them. The only course available to tradition then is reaction to action. It raises its defenses and attempts to shield truth from the attacks. The reactions do little more than encourage further action on the part of the predators, who turn their attention to devising new strategies and tactics to breach the defenses once and for all. Satan has an easy time with a fixed and static tradition. Since there is no new material forthcoming, he can content himself with learning the old material inside out until he knows it off by heart. If there is one thing traditionalists must not delude themselves about, it is this: no being in this world understands or will ever understand a fixed, static conceptualization of tradition better than the Prince of Lies. Those who abide by the fixed and static conceptualization of tradition do so primarily because of the belief in truth as an eternal criterion. This conceptualization is incomplete rather than blatantly wrong. The criterion of truth is eternal, but it is not fixed, static, and external, but dynamic. The Prince of Lies knows this, which is why he uses progress to attack tradition. The progress he employs is directly opposed to God and creation, thus, it proclaims to draw on the tradition to further its cause, but instead actively works against it. Thus, the progress Satan demands and institutes is destructive rather than creative. Those who defend tradition see the destruction for what it is and retreat further behind their defenses. However, by doing so, they also retreat from the possibility of true creativity, from the potential and long overdue continuation of tradition via creativity. Hence, the Prince of Lies is able to accomplish two objectives at once: keep tradition fixed and static where it remains an easy target to foe and destructive progress, and turn traditionalists away from the potential of true creativity, through which tradition could continue to evolve by becoming what it has always been and what it was always meant to be, a dynamic unfolding in time. As stated above, a fixed and static tradition offers no significant challenge to the Prince of Lies and his legions. They have been studying it, analyzing it, and attacking it for centuries. To them, the war against the fixed and static tradition is little more than a war of attrition. They have the upper hand. They know it's only a matter of time. But if they had to deal with a vigorous, energetic tradition that embraced dynamism and creativity because it embraced the obvious truth that the Holy Spirit is dynamic, not static, if they were faced with Christians who understood that God, creation, Christianity, and man are not finished products, well, I dare say they would find themselves on the back foot, scattered and confused in territory they could have never imagined, let alone studied and learned.